Part 5 of Naudsonce by H. Beam Piper. This librivox recording is in the public domain. Part 5. There were no hot showers that evening. Dave Questel's gang had trouble with the pump and needed some new parts made up aboard the ship. They were still working on it the next morning. He had meant to start teaching Sonny blacksmithing, but during the evening Lillian and Anna had decided to try teaching Mom a non-phonetic ideographic alphabet, and in the morning they co-opted Sonny to help. Deprived of his disciple, he strolled over to watch the work on the pump. About 20 swans had come in from the fields and were also watching from the meadow. After a while the job was finished. The petty officer in charge of the work pushed in the switch, and the pump started, sucking dry with a harsh racket. The natives twittered in surprise. Then the water came, and the pump settled down to a steady thug-thug, thug-thug. The swans seemed to like the new sound. They grimaced in pleasure and moved closer. Within 40 or 50 feet, they all squatted on the ground and sat entranced. Others came in from the fields drawn by the sound. They, too, came up and squatted until there was a semicircle of them. The tank took a long time to fill. Until it did, they all sat immobile and fascinated. Even after it stopped, many remained, hoping that it would start again. Paul Millard began wondering, a trifle uneasily, if that would happen every time the pump went on. They get a positive pleasure from it. It affects them the same way Louis's voice does. "Mean I have a voice like a pump?" Goffredo demanded. "Well, I'm going to find out," Ayesha Keithley said. "The next time that starts, I'm going to make a recording and compare it with your voice recording. I'll give 5 to 1 there'll be a similarity." Questell got the foundation of the sonic slab dug and began pouring concrete. That took water, and the pump ran continuously that afternoon. Concrete mixing took more water the next day, and by noon the whole village population, down to the smallest child, was massed at the pump house, enthralled. Mom was snared by the sound like any of the rest. Only Sonny was unaffected. Lillian and Ayesha compared recordings of the voices of the team with the pump sound. In Goffredo's, they found an identical frequency pattern. "We'll need the new apparatus to be positive about it, but it's there all right," Ayesha said. "That's why Louis's voice pleases them." "That tags me, old pump mouth," Goffredo said. "It'll get all through the Corps, and they'll be calling me that when I'm a 4-star general, if I live that long." Millard was really worried now. So was Bennet Fayon. He said so that afternoon at cocktail time. "It's an addiction," he declared. "Once they hear it, they have no will to resist. They just squat and listen. I don't know what it's doing to them, but I'm scared of it." "I know one thing it's doing," Millard said. "It's keeping them from their work in the fields. For all we know, it may cause them to lose a crop they need badly for subsistence." The native they had come to call the Lord Mayor evidently thought so too. He was with the others the next morning, squatting with his staff across his knees, as bemused as any of them. But when the pump stopped, he rose and approached a group of Terrans, launching into what could only be an impassioned tirade. He pointed with his staff to the pump house and to the semicircle of still motionless villagers. He pointed to the fields and back to the people, and to the pump house again, gesturing vehemently with his other hand. "You make the noise. My people will not work while they hear it. The fields lie untended. Stop the noise and let my people work." Couldn't possibly be any plainer. Then the pump started again. The Lord Mayor's hands tightened on his staff. He was struggling tormentedly with himself. In vain. His face relaxed into the heartbroken expression of joy. He turned and shuffled over, dropping onto his haunches with the others. "Shut down the pump, Dave," Millard called out. "Cut the power off." The thugging stopped. The Lord Mayor rose, made an odd salaam-like bow toward the Terrans, and then turned on the people, striking with his staff and shrieking at them. A few got to their feet and joined him, screaming, pushing, tugging. Others joined. In a little while they were all on their feet, straggling away across the fields. Dave Questell wanted to know what it meant. Millard explained. "Well, what are we going to do for water?" the Navy engineer asked. "Soundproof the pump house. You can do that, can't you?" "Sure. Mound it over with earth. We'll have that done in a few hours." That started Gofredo worrying. "This happens every time we colonize an inhabited planet. We give the natives something new, they find out it's bad for them, and we try to take it away from them. And then the knives come out and the shooting starts." Louis Gofredo was a specialist speaking on his subject. While they were at lunch, Charlie Loughran screened in from the other camp and wanted to talk to Bennett Fayon. "A funny thing, Bennett. I took a shot at a bird, no, a flying mammal, and dropped it. It was dead when it hit the ground, but there isn't a mark on it. I want you to do an autopsy and find out how I can kill things by missing them." "How far away was it?" "Call it 40 feet, no more." "What were you using, Charlie?" Ayesha Keithley called from the table. 8.5 Mars Consolidated pistol, Loughran said. "I laid my shotgun down and walked away from it." 1,200 foot-seconds, Ayesha said. "Bow wave as well as muzzle blast." "You think the report was what did it?" Fayon asked. "You want to bet it didn't?" she countered. "Nobody did." Mom was sulky. She didn't like what Dave Questel's men were doing to the nice noise place. Ayesha and Lillian consoled her by talking her into the soundproofed room and playing the recording of the pump noise for her. Sonny couldn't care less, one way or another. He spent the afternoon teaching Mark Howell what the marks on paper meant. It took a lot of signs and play acting. He had learned about 30 ideographs. By combining them and drawing little pictures, he could express a number of simple ideas. There was, of course, a limit to how many of those things anybody could learn and remember. Look how long it took an old Terran Chinese scribe to learn his profession. But it was the beginning of a method of communication. Questell got the pump house mounded over. Ayesha came out and tried a sound meter, and also Mom, on it while the pump was running. Neither reacted. A good many Svants were watching the work. They began to demonstrate angrily. A couple tried to interfere and were knocked down with rifle butts. The Lord Mayor and his board of aldermen came out with the big horn and harangued them at length, and finally got them to go back to the fields. As nearly as anybody could tell, he was friendly to and cooperative with the Terrans. The snooper over the village reported excitement in the plaza. Bennett Fayon had taken an airjeep to the other camp immediately after lunch. He was back by 1500, accompanied by Loughran. They carried a cloth-wrapped package into Fayon's dissecting room. At cocktail time, Paul Millard had to go and get them. "Sorry," Fayon said, joining the group. "Didn't notice how late it was getting. We're still doing a post on this Svant bat. That's what Charlie's calling it, till we get the native name." The immediate cause of death was spasmodic contraction of every muscle in the thing's body. Some of them were partly relaxed before we could get to work on it, but not completely. Every bone that isn't broken is dislocated, a good many both. There is not the slightest trace of external injury. Everything was done by its own muscles. He looked around. "I hope nobody covered Ayesha's bed after I left. If they did, she collects." The large outer membranes in the comb seem to be unaffected, but there is considerable compression of the small round ones inside, in just one area, and more on the left side than on the right. Charlie says it was flying across in front of him from left to right. The receptor area responding to the frequencies of the report, Ayesha said. Anna de Jong made a passing gesture toward Phaon. The baby's yours, Bennett, she said. This isn't psychological. I won't accept a case of psychosomatic compound fracture. Don't be too premature about it, Anna. I think that's more or less what you have here. Everybody looked at him, surprised. His subject was comparative technology. The bio and psychosciences were completely outside his field. A lot of things have been bothering me ever since the first contact. I'm beginning to think I'm on the edge of understanding them now. Bennett, the higher life forms here, the people and that Naudsonce and Charlie's savant bat, are structurally identical with us. I don't mean gross structure like ears and combs. I mean molecular and cellular and tissue structure. Is that right? Phaon nodded. Biology on this planet is exactly Terra type. Yes. With adequate safeguards, I'd even say you could make a viable tissue graft from a savant to a Terran or vice versa. Ayesha, would the sound waves from that pistol shot in any conceivable way have the sort of physical effect we're considering? Absolutely not, she said. And Louis Gofredo said, I've been shot at and missed with pistols at closer range than that. Then it was the effect on the animal's nervous system. Anna shrugged. It's still Bennett's baby. I'm a psychologist, not a neurologist. What I've been saying all along, Phaon reiterated complacently. Their hearing is different from ours. This proves it. It proves that they don't hear at all. He had expected an explosion. He wasn't disappointed. They all contradicted him, many derisively. Signal reactions. Only Paul Millard made the semantically appropriate response. What do you mean, Mark? They don't hear sound. They feel it. You saw what they have inside their combs. Those things don't transmit sound like the ears of any sound-sensitive life form we've ever seen. They transform sound waves into tactile sensations. Phaon cursed slowly and luridly. Anna de Jong looked at him wide-eyed. He finished his cocktail and poured another. In the snooper screen, what looked like an indignation meeting was making uproar in the village plaza. Gofredo cut the volume of the speaker even lower. That would explain a lot of things, Millard said slowly. How hard it was for them to realize that we didn't understand when they talked to us. A punch in the nose feels the same to anybody. They thought they were giving us bodily feelings. They didn't know we were insensible to them. But they do have a language, Lillian faltered. They talk. Not the way we understand it. If they want to say me, it's tickle, pinch, rub, even if it sounds like fwonk to us. When it doesn't sound like pwink or tweedle or croosh. The tactile sensations to a savant feels no more different than a massage by 4 different hands. Analogous to a word pronounced by 4 different voices to us. They'll have a code for expressing meanings in tactile sensation, just as we have a code for expressing meanings in audible sound. Except that when a savant tells another, I am happy, or I have a stomachache, he makes the other one feel that way too, Anna said. That would carry an awful lot more conviction. I don't imagine symptom swapping is popular among savants. Carl, you were nearly right at that. This isn't telepathy, but it's a lot like it. So it is, Dorver, who had been mourning his departed telepathy theory, said brightly. And look how it explains their society. Peaceful, everybody in quick agreement. He looked at the screen and gulped. The Lord Mayor and his party had formed one clump, and the opposition was grouped at the other side of the plaza. They were screaming in unison at each other. They make their decisions by endurance. The party that can resist the feelings of the other longest converts their opponents. Pure democracy, Gofredo declared, ruled by the party that can make the most noise. And I'll bet that when they're sick, they go around chanting, 'I am well, I feel just fine,'" Anna said. "Autosuggestion would really work here. Think of the feedback, too. One savant has a feeling, he verbalizes it, and the sound of his own voice reinforces it to him. It is induced to his hearers, and they verbalize it, reinforcing it in themselves and to him. This could go on and on." "Yes, it has. Look at their technology." He felt more comfortable. Now he was on home ground again. A friend of mine, speaking about a mutual acquaintance, once said, "When they installed her circuits, they put in such big feeling circuits that there was no room left for any thinking circuits." I think that's a perfect description of what I estimate savant mentality to be. Take these bronze knives and the musical instruments. Wonderful, the work of individuals trying to express feeling in metal or wood. But get an idea like the wheel, or even a pair of tongs? Pooh! How would you state the first law of motion, or the second law of thermodynamics, in tickle-pinch-rub terms? Sonny could grasp an idea like that. Sonny's handicap, if you call it that, cuts him off from field thinking. He can think logically instead of sensually. He sipped his cocktail and continued, "I can understand why the village is mounded up, too. I realized that while I was watching Dave's gang bury the pump house. I'd been bothered by that, and by the absence of granaries for all the grain they raise, and by the number of people for so few and such small houses. I think the village is mostly underground, and the houses are just entrances, soundproofed to shelter them from uncomfortable natural noises, thunderstorms, for instance." The horn was braying in the snooper screen speaker. Somebody wondered what it was for. Goffredo laughed. "I thought at first that it was a war horn. It isn't. It's a peace horn," he said. "Public tranquilizer. The first day they brought it out and blew it at us to make us peaceable. Now I see why Sonny is rejected and persecuted," Anna was saying. "He must make all sorts of horrible noises that he can't hear. That's not the word, we have none of it. And nobody but his mother can stand being near him." "Like me," Lillian said. "Now I understand. Just think of the most revolting thing that can be done to you physically. That's what I do to them every time I speak. And I always thought I had a nice voice," she added pathetically. "You have, for Terrans," Ayesha said. "For savants, you'll just have to change it." "But how?" "Use an analyzer. Train it. That was why I took up sonics in the first place. I had a voice like a crow with a sore throat. But by practicing with an analyzer, an hour a day, I gave myself an entirely different voice in a couple of months. Just try to get some pump-sounding frequencies into it like Lewis's." "But why? I'm no use here. I'm a linguist, and these people haven't any language that I could ever learn, and they couldn't even learn ours. They couldn't learn to make sounds as sounds." "You've been doing very good work with Mom on those ideographs," Millard said. "Keep it up till you've taught her the Lingua Terra basic vocabulary, and with her help we can train a few more. They can be our interpreters. We can write what we want them to say to the others. It'll be clumsy, but it'll work. And it's about the only thing I can think of that will." "And it will improve in time," Ayesha added. "And we can make vocoders and visibilizers. Paul, you have authority to requisition personnel from the ship's company. Draft me. I'll stay here and work on it." The rumpus in the village plaza was getting worse. The Lord Mayor and his adherents were being outshouted by the opposition. "Better do something about that in a hurry, Paul, if you don't want a lot of svants shot," Goffredo said. "Give that another half hour and we'll have visitors with bows and spears." "Ayesha, you have a recording of the pump," Millard said. "Load a record player onto a jeep and fly over the village and play it for them. Do it right away. Anna, get Mom in here. We want to get her to tell that gang that from now on, at noon and for a couple of hours after sunset, when the work's done, there will be free public pump concerts over the village plaza. Ayesha and her warrant officer helper and a Marine lieutenant went out hastily. Everybody else faced the screen to watch. In 15 minutes, an air jeep was coming in on the village. As it circled low, a new sound, the steady thug, 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 thug of the pump began. The yelling and twittering and the blaring of the peace horn died out almost at once. As the jeep circled down to housetop level, the two contending faction clumps broke apart. Their component individuals moved into the center of the plaza and squatted, staring up, letting the delicious waves of sound caress them. "Do we have to send a detail in a jeep to do that twice a day?" Gofredo asked. "We keep a snooper over the village, fit it with a loudspeaker and a timer. It can give them their thug-thug on schedule automatically. We might give the Lord Mayor a recording and a player and let him decide when the people ought to listen, if that's the word, to it," Dorver said. "Then it would be something of their own." "No." He spoke so vehemently that the others started. "You know what would happen? Nobody would be able to turn it off. They'd all be hypnotized or doped or whatever it is. They'd just sit in a circle around it till they starved to death, and when the power unit gave out, the record player would be surrounded by a ring of skeletons. We'll just have to keep on playing it for them ourselves. Terran's burden." "That'll give us a sanction over them," Gofredo observed. "Extra thug-thug if they're very good. Shut it off on them if they act nasty. And find out what Lillian has in her voice that the rest of us don't have, and make a good, loud recording of that and stash it away along with the rest of the heavy weapons ammunition. You know, you're not going to have any trouble at all when we go down country to talk to the king or whatever. This is better than firewater ever was." "We must never misuse our advantage, Louis," Millard said seriously. "We must use it only for their good." He really meant it. Only you had to know some general history to study technological history, and it seemed to him that that pious assertion had been made a few times before. Some of the others who had made it had really meant it too, but that had made little difference in the long run. Phaon and Anna were talking enthusiastically about the work ahead of them. "I don't know where your subject ends and mine begins," Anna was saying. "We'll just have to handle it between us. What are we going to call it? We certainly can't call it hearing." "Non-auditory sonic sense is the only thing I can think of," Phaon said. "And that's such a clumsy term." "Mark, you thought of it first," Anna said. "What do you think?" "Non-auditory sonic sense. It isn't any worse than domesticated type C, and that got cut down to size. Naudsonce." End of Part 5. End of Naudsonce by H. Beam Piper. This story recorded by Phil Chenevert, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in November of 2012.